They say don't poke the bear. Especially not when the bear's a divorced contractor with long hours, a short fuse, and a half-acre of land he paid good money for. But Sandra Wilcox, president of the Maple Hollow HOA and Karen-in-chief, must have missed that memo when she dumped a full truckload of garbage on the back end of my property. It was a Thursday morning, just after I'd gotten back from a week-long fencing job upstate. My name's Silas Bradner. I'm 42, run a small business doing general contracting and remodels, and I live on the edge of Maple Hollow, just inside the HOA's jurisdiction. That last part, unfortunately, is where my troubles started. I pulled into my driveway around 7 a.m., sun still low, coffee in hand, exhausted but glad to be home. But instead of the neat gravel I'd laid out behind my shed, I saw a mountain of black trash bags, busted furniture, and what looked like an old toilet. My land backed up to a thin row of trees that separated me from the Wilcox place, and the trash trail ran right through them. At first, I thought I'd been hit by some illegal dumper. Happens now and then near construction sites. But when I followed the trail back through the trees, I saw the tire tracks, fresh, narrow, like from a golf cart or a small trailer. And most importantly, there was a red Solo cup with a Maple Hollow HOA logo on it, half buried in the leaves. I didn't need to be Sherlock to figure it out. Sandra Wilcox lived behind me, and she'd been on my case for months. First, it was the unauthorized shed, then the non-regulation fencing. After that, she cited me for excessive noise when I used a table saw at noon on a Saturday, always with a fake smile, always with a clipboard. The woman was a walking codebook with a superiority complex, but dumping garbage on my land. That was new. I didn't call her. I didn't call the HOA. I didn't even call the sheriff. I just stood there with my coffee, staring at the heap of trash while an idea formed. A petty, beautiful idea. By noon, I'd borrowed a dump trailer from my buddy Lewis and backed it up near the pile. I spent the next 3 hours shoveling every last bag, broken chair, and used diaper into it, and I kept going. I grabbed the rake and made sure even the smallest bits of plastic and paper were collected. I wore gloves and a mask because it stunk like death and old pizza, but I was fueled by spite and 2 Red Bulls. When the trailer was full, I latched the gate, pulled around the trees, and parked right in front of Sandra's pristine 3-car garage. Her Lexus and golf cart were both parked outside, which meant the garage was empty. Perfect. I reversed, opened the trailer gate, and started unloading. Not on her driveway. No. I opened her garage door unlocked, of course, because Sandra believed locks were unsightly, and backed right in. Bag after bag, chair after chair. I stacked it neatly, floor to ceiling, wall to wall. Took me almost an hour. Even left the toilet in the center like a cherry on top. By the time I finished, I was sweating through my shirt and covered in dust and grime. I rolled her garage door down, latched it closed, and wheeled the empty trailer home like I'd just returned from a victorious hunt. I knew she'd come storming over eventually, so I set up my security cameras to cover every angle. I had 4 of them around the house, already 2 mounted under the eaves, 1 on the shed, and 1 on a post near the back gate. I added a 5th that pointed straight toward the woods between our properties. Then I waited. Didn't take long. Around 5 p.m., I was on my porch with a cold beer, watching the sun dip behind the oaks when I heard the scream. A high-pitched, enraged shriek like a cat being thrown into a bathtub. Then came the slamming of a door, the clack of heels on pavement, and Sandra Wilcox herself came marching across my lawn like she owned the place. She wore her usual pastel blue pantsuit, hair teased into some kind of weaponized helmet, HOA badge clipped proudly to her lapel. "You absolute animal," she shouted, pointing a manicured finger at me. "You broke into my garage and committed criminal dumping. Do you have any idea what you've done?" I sipped my beer and looked her square in the eye. "I just returned what was mine." "What? You dumped that trash on my land," I said calmly, "so I brought it back." "That is a disgusting lie," she snapped. "I would never. I've got tire tracks, a red HOA cup, and camera footage," I interrupted. "Want to see it?" Her eyes flickered. "Just for a second. That was all I needed. You have no proof," she said quickly. And I'm citing you for illegal dumping, trespassing, and property damage. The board will hear about this." "Good," I said, standing up, "because the sheriff will too." Sandra turned pale. I didn't bluff. I never bluff. I walked into the house, pulled the memory card from my camera system, and drove straight to the sheriff's office. I knew Deputy Carla from a few jobs I'd done at the station. She watched the footage, took one look at the tire tracks, the timestamp, and the HOA cart visible through the trees and whistled. "Yup," she said. "That's illegal dumping, trespassing, and littering. And if she's doing it in her role as HOA president, this could get real spicy." By the time I got back home, Sandra was gone, but her Lexus was missing too. Later that night, I saw a sheriff's cruiser parked outside her house, lights off, but they were watching, and that was only the beginning. Because what Sandra didn't know was that I just triggered a chain reaction, one that would drag the entire HOA board into the spotlight and uncover the rotten underbelly they'd been hiding for years. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of someone hammering something into my mailbox post. I stepped out onto the porch, coffee in hand, and watched a wiry man in a beige HOA windbreaker pin a bright orange notice to the wood. He didn't look at me as he turned and walked off briskly toward a white SUV idling down the block. I tore the paper down. "Notice of violation," it read in bold black letters. The HOA was citing me for unauthorized vehicular access, environmental hazard creation, and my favorite, community endangerment via unsanitary waste relocation. So this was how they wanted to play. I spent the next 20 minutes reviewing the footage from my shed camera, which had a clear shot of the guy stapling the notice. The timestamp lined up with the HOA's usual early morning patrols. That wasn't new. What was new was the fact that the man wasn't a board member. I'd never seen him at any meetings or in any of the HOA's published member rosters. He didn't even live in Maple Hollow. A quick facial search through a contractor database, I had access to perks of running a licensed business, revealed him as a third-party code enforcement officer from a company called Civic Plus Solutions. That was a problem. HOAs are allowed to contract outside help in some cases, but only under very limited conditions. Hiring an outside company to perform enforcement duties, especially without notice to residents, was something completely different. I drove to the county clerk's office and pulled the HOA's charter. I'd requested it months ago when the shed nonsense started and kept the file updated. Sure enough, there was nothing in the charter allowing third-party enforcement officers to issue citations. All enforcement actions had to be conducted by elected board members or approved subcommittees, with written notice required before any outside party could be involved. That gave me something solid. I called an old client of mine, Lynette Grover, a paralegal with a firm that handled municipal code disputes. She looked over the footage and the charter documents and told me flat out that the HOA had overstepped in a big way. "They're impersonating municipal authority," she explained. "That's a major civil violation. If they've issued citations through this company before, they could be liable for thousands in fines. And if they charged homeowners fees based on those citations, that's fraud." I asked her what I needed to do next. "You need statements," she said. "Get residents to confirm they've been cited by this company. You'll want dated letters, photos of the notices, anything that proves the enforcement came from someone outside the board. If you can get 10 or more residents to confirm it, I'll get a formal complaint filed with the county." I spent the next 2 days knocking on doors. Most people were hesitant at first. Maple Hollow wasn't the kind of place where folks like to rock the boat. But once I showed them the footage of the Civic Plus guy stapling that notice to my mailbox, the dam started to crack. First, it was the retired couple 2 doors down who'd been fined for improperly secured recycling. Then the single mom on Birch Lane who'd paid over $200 to avoid escalation after a broken porch light was cited. After that came the quiet veteran at the end of the cul-de-sac. He hadn't spoken to anyone in years, but he handed me a stack of letters going back 6 months, all signed by Civic Plus Solutions, none of them legal. By Sunday evening, I had over 20 signed statements with photo evidence and document scans. I dropped the file off with Lynette, and she promised to move fast. On Monday morning, the sheriff's department made its move. 2 cruisers rolled into Maple Hollow just before 9, parking directly in front of the HOA clubhouse. Sandra's Lexus was already there, parked diagonally across 2 spaces as usual. Deputies went inside, and 10 minutes later, Sandra came out flanked by 2 officers. Her face was blank, her hands folded in front of her like she was heading to an awards banquet, but she didn't get in her car. She got into the back of the cruiser. It wasn't an arrest yet, but it was formal questioning. And once the county reviewed the enforcement contracts, it was going to get worse, but the HOA wasn't done. That night, someone slashed the tires on my truck. I didn't hear them. I'd parked out back, behind the shed, and whoever did it knew exactly where my cameras didn't reach. The sidewalls were cut clean through professional work. I filed a report with the sheriff, but I knew they wouldn't find anything unless someone came forward, so I made sure someone would. The next day, I installed 2 new trail cams in the woods between my property and Sandra's. I camouflaged them in the trees, motion activated and connected to a solar panel. Then I wired a floodlight to the shed wall, one of those stadium-grade ones, and rigged it so that if anything moved in the back third of my lot after dark, the whole place would light up like a prison yard. That night, I sat up on the porch with a thermos of coffee and a police scanner running quietly beside me. Around 2 a.m., a figure moved through the woods. The trail cam pinged first, lighting up my phone. I tapped into the live feed and saw a tall man in a black hoodie and gloves crouching behind a tree near the back fence. He was holding something long and narrow, looked like a crowbar. I didn't move, just watched. The man crept toward the edge of the shed, paused, and raised the tool probably to pry open the lock. That's when the floodlight kicked on. The guy froze like a deer in headlights. Then he bolted straight into my tripwire. It was just a taut length of fishing line, strung between 2 posts and rigged to a bucket of gravel. When he hit it, the bucket toppled, making a racket loud enough to wake the dead. I was already on my feet, shotgun in hand, but I didn't need to use it. The guy took off through the woods so fast he nearly tripped over his own feet. The trail cam got everything. Clear shot of his face as he turned back once, panicked and breathless. I ran the image through a facial recognition tool and got a hit within the hour. His name was Derek Winslow. A part-time maintenance worker and, more importantly, Sandra Wilcox's nephew. He didn't live in Maple Hollow, but he'd been seen around the clubhouse, trimming hedges and repainting curbs. He wasn't registered with any landscaping companies. No license, no insurance. Just a relative doing favors for the board. I turned the footage over to the sheriff's office the next morning. 2 days later, a warrant was issued for Derek's arrest on attempted property damage, trespassing, and conspiracy to intimidate a witness in an active investigation. That was the nail in the coffin. Once the county prosecutors got involved, they started pulling financial records from the HOA's bank accounts. Turns out, Sandra had been paying Civic Plus Solutions under the table, funneling money from the beautification fund, which was supposed to be used for public benches, landscaping, and community events. Over $15,000 had disappeared in the last year alone. The board claimed ignorance, but one of the treasurers cracked under pressure and turned over email chains showing the rest of them had signed off on most of it. They'd been hiding fake invoices, labeling them as community outreach and waste management consulting. By the next HOA meeting, the entire board had either resigned or been suspended pending investigation. A temporary oversight committee was formed by the county, and residents were invited to vote on whether the HOA should be dissolved entirely or restructured under direct municipal supervision. They held the vote in the clubhouse, with sheriff's deputies standing by. The motion to dissolve passed by a landslide, 92% in favor. Sandra Wilcox was formally charged with fraud, misuse of community funds, and criminal conspiracy to falsify enforcement actions. Her trial date was set for the following month. As for me, the county offered to cover the cost of replacing my tires and even threw in a small grant to install permanent surveillance infrastructure on my property. They called it a community resilience initiative. I called it justice. 3 weeks after the HOA board's collapse, things in Maple Hollow were quieter. Not peaceful, not yet, but quieter. With the board dissolved and Sandra awaiting trial, it felt like the neighborhood was holding its breath, waiting to see what would come out of the shadows next. I'd gone back to work. Had a remodel out in Pulaski, a 2-week job restoring a fire-damaged kitchen. Kept my head down, but I still checked the neighborhood forum every evening. The temporary oversight committee had opened up public access to all internal HOA records. They'd even set up a hotline for residents to report past abuses. And boy, did that floodgates swing wide. But one thing kept nagging at me. There was a folder I couldn't stop thinking about when I'd seen back when I dropped off the evidence packet at Lynette's office. It had been sitting on the far side of her desk, half open. The tab read, Greenfield Annexation Proposal. I hadn't asked about it at the time, figured it wasn't related, but now, with everything that had come to light, I wasn't so sure. I called Lynette the next morning. She answered on the first ring, her voice low and clipped like she was already 5 steps ahead of me. "You saw the folder, didn't you?" she asked. "Yeah, something about annexation." There was a pause. "That file, Silas, it's worse than the citations or the garbage." "Way worse." I didn't interrupt, just let her keep going. The HOA under Sandra's direction was in talks with a developer, private company out of Nashville backed by a holding group called Mariner Bay. They were planning to expand the Maple Hollow jurisdiction by absorbing the old greenfield parcels just south of the woods. The land's technically unincorporated, but a few families still live out there. Farmers, retirees, folks who have been on that land for generations. "What does that have to do with us?" "They were going to push a zoning change through the county board," she said, "then use that to claim enforcement rights over Greenfield. Once that happened, they'd fine the residents into compliance or force them to sell." I blinked, pacing the edge of my porch. "You're saying they were planning to seize land? Legally, it would look like policy, but functionally, yeah. They were gearing up to take it. And Sandra was behind this. She signed the letters of intent. We have the emails, but she wasn't alone. There's someone else. A man named Ellis Crane, former city zoning commissioner. He's been consulting for HOAs across the state, helping them exploit legal gray zones. He's the one who drew up the annexation framework." "I've heard that name," I said. "He was at the HOA barbecue last summer. Tall guy, silver hair, always wore those weird 2-tone loafers." "That's him. He's slippery. Doesn't live here, doesn't hold a title, but he's been pulling strings behind the scenes for years." I leaned on the railing, jaw tight. "What do you need from me?" "Testimony. You interacted directly with the board. You've got footage, timestamps, and a clean record. We're building a civil suit class action, but we need someone to tie Sandra's behavior to the annexation scheme, show the pattern. I'll do it." That night, I dug through my archives. Every letter I'd received from the HOA, every notice, every fine, and every blurry snapshot they'd taken of my shed or fence. I organized it all, cross-referenced it with the dates Lynette gave me, and flagged an email I'd nearly forgotten, one from Sandra herself, sent 6 months ago. It had a subject line that read, "Upcoming Jurisdiction Refinement." Inside, it talked about streamlining enforcement boundaries and aligning our neighborhood with growing regional development interests. I hadn't thought much of it back then. Now, it was a smoking gun. When I handed it off to Lynette, she whistled. "This puts her in the room months earlier than we thought. Silas, this could tie the whole plan directly to her leadership. And if we can prove they used HOA funds to support this annexation, bribes, consulting fees, anything, then it's not just a civil case anymore." "Then let's go all the way." The county prosecutor agreed. They opened a grand jury investigation 2 days later. Subpoenas were issued. Bank records seized. And that's when everything came crashing down. Turns out, Sandra hadn't just been paying Civic Plus and Ellis Crane. She'd authorized payments to a shell company registered in Delaware, Wexler Community Solutions. It showed up as a strategic consulting line item in the HOA's ledger, but Wexler didn't have a website, a phone number, or even an office. Its only listed employee, Ellis Crane. The county's financial crimes unit traced over $30,000 in payments over a 9-month span. And then they found the internal memo buried in a backup drive on a confiscated HOA laptop. It detailed the entire plan: expand Maple Hollow into Greenfield, rezone the land, then offer it to Mariner Bay for development. New shopping centers, townhomes, even a private golf course. And every step was funded with HOA money. The sheriff's department arrested Ellis Crane at a conference in Nashville. Sandra was hit with additional charges: racketeering, public corruption, and conspiracy to defraud a municipality. The news hit the local press like a thunderclap. I couldn't go to the gas station without someone nodding at me. Folks who used to avoid eye contact now crossed the street to shake my hand. I didn't ask for any of it, but I understood. What happened in Maple Hollow wasn't just petty corruption, it was predatory, and people were tired of being prey. The county froze the HOA's bank accounts and placed the remaining funds in a trust. A judge ordered restitution for every resident who'd paid a fine under the Civic Plus enforcement scheme. Over 80 families got refund checks within a month, but the best part: Greenfield was declared permanently outside the reach of any HOA. The county council passed a resolution ensuring its independence, citing the egregious and coordinated attempt to dissolve private ownership under the guise of policy. Lynette called me the day it passed. "You just saved over 100 acres of family land," she said. "You know that. I didn't do it alone." "No, but you were the first to say enough. That counts for something." I didn't say much after that, just leaned back in my chair, watching the last rays of sunlight cut through the trees. The woods that had once hidden tire tracks and garbage now stood quiet and golden. A week later, I got a letter in the mail, not from the county, not from Lynette. From the McCrays, an older couple who lived out in Greenfield. Never met them before, but they'd heard the whole story. Inside was a handwritten note thanking me for protecting their land, and a small wooden carving of a bear about the size of a baseball. It wasn't fancy. Looked like it had been whittled from an old fence post, but it sat heavy in my hand, real and solid. There's a quote I heard once, something about the strength of a community being measured not by its rules, but by who stands when the rules are abused. In Maple Hollow, the rules had been twisted until they snapped. But we stood together, and the bear, he's still here, watching, waiting. Because if anyone ever tries something like that again, they'd better remember what happened the last time someone dumped trash on my land. The courtroom smelled like stale paper and floor wax, and the fluorescent lights overhead buzzed just enough to be annoying. I sat in the second row behind the prosecution table, tie uncomfortably tight around my neck. I hadn't worn it since my cousin's funeral, but this felt like it deserved the same level of formality. Sandra Wilcox sat across the aisle, flanked by 2 attorneys in dark suits who looked more irritated than confident. She wore a muted gray dress and a hollow expression, her once perfectly shellacked hair now pulled into a tight bun that did little to hide the tension in her jaw. The charges against her had piled up over the last 2 months. What started as a simple case of illegal dumping had snowballed into a list of felonies long enough to require a separate binder. The judge, a wiry man with silver spectacles and a no-nonsense demeanor, had already warned both sides that this would be a swift proceeding. No theatrics, no delays, just facts. Lynette slid into the seat next to me and handed over a manila folder. Inside were deposition summaries from 3 of the former board members, all of whom had accepted plea deals in exchange for testimony. Each one confirmed what we already knew. Sandra had orchestrated the payments to Civic Plus and Wexler, signed off on fake invoices, and personally convinced Ellis Crane to draft the annexation plan. But what none of us had expected was the new allegation tucked into the final page of the folder. She used HOA funds to purchase surveillance drones, Lynette whispered, keeping her eyes on the bench. I blinked. For what? Monitoring residents, she said. Apparently, she had a contractor rig them to fly routes over certain properties, yours included. There's a hard drive in evidence with flight logs, video files, the works. That's federal, I said. FAA violations, privacy invasion, surveillance without consent. Exactly. The prosecution's adding it today. The bailiff called the court to order, and everything went still. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Denise Holcomb, stood and laid out the charges with the precision of a seasoned surgeon. She didn't raise her voice, didn't pace or perform. She didn't need to. The facts were damning enough: fraud, criminal conspiracy, grand theft from a community fund, attempted land seizure through falsified zoning petitions, and now unlawful aerial surveillance. When the judge asked how the defendant intended to plead, Sandra's attorney stood and adjusted his tie. "Not guilty, Your Honor." Sandra didn't look at me, not once. The trial lasted 3 days. I was called to testify on the afternoon of the 2nd. I described the trash dumping, the trail through the trees, the HOA cup, the security footage, then the fabricated citations delivered by a non-resident contractor. I explained how I traced the fake enforcement back to Civic Plus, how Lynette uncovered the annexation plot, and how the drone footage had crossed a line none of us had realized until it was too late. The defense tried to paint me as retaliatory, emotional, reckless. They even brought up the fact that I'd returned the trash to Sandra's garage, suggesting it showed a pattern of instability. "You took matters into your own hands," the defense attorney said. "Isn't that right, Mr. Bradner?" I returned what wasn't mine, I replied evenly. "And I did it without vandalism, violence, or threats, unlike your client." The courtroom stayed quiet after that. When the prosecution played the drone footage, the silence turned to unease. Video after video, each time-stamped, showed aerial sweeps of backyards, porches, and even open bedroom windows. There were faces, children playing, people gardening. One clip showed me hauling lumber across my lot, completely unaware I was being filmed from above. The FAA representative confirmed none of the drones had been registered. No flight plans had been filed. They were, by all definitions, rogue devices operated without oversight. By the end of the 3rd day, the jury didn't need long. Sandra Wilcox was found guilty on all counts. The judge ordered immediate remand into custody pending sentencing. Her attorneys asked for leniency based on her age and years of community service. The judge didn't even blink. "Community service," he repeated. "You weaponized community governance for personal gain. You violated the trust of every resident you claim to serve. This court finds no mitigating factors. Sentencing will proceed without delay." She was given 7 years for fraud, 2 for the surveillance violations, and 3 more for conspiracy and attempted land misappropriation. 10 years in total. No parole for the first 5. Restitution was ordered, and the funds still frozen from the HOA's accounts were ordered to be distributed back to residents equally. Over 100 households received checks within the month. Ellis Crane's trial followed shortly after. He was hit with 6 counts of conspiracy to defraud a municipality and 2 counts of money laundering. He had no plea deal. His arrogance in court didn't help. He got 8 years federal time. The Civic Plus enforcement scheme was dismantled entirely. A class action suit forced them to terminate contracts with over 24 HOAs statewide. Their CEO stepped down. Their reputation was shredded. With the HOA dissolved, the county established a new neighborhood council, voluntary, advisory only. I didn't run for it. But I did help build the new community shed with reclaimed lumber from a barn the McCraes donated. Funny how it came full circle, building something real, something useful, out of all the damage Sandra tried to cause. One Saturday morning, I stood outside that shed, watching 2 neighbor kids paint a mural on the side. Trees, birds, and a big brown bear sitting peacefully under a pine. Their mom said they wanted to paint the bear because he keeps the bad people out. I didn't correct them. Later that afternoon, Lynette stopped by. She handed me a thick envelope with a court seal on the front. "Official closure letter," she said. "Case file sealed, restitution processed, all appeals denied." I opened it and thumbed through the papers. Legal language, formal signatures, finality in black ink. "You did good, Silas," she said. "You didn't just stop her, you reset the whole place." "I just wanted my land back," I said. "You got more than that. You gave people their voice back." I didn't answer. Just folded the letter and slid it into my desk drawer back home. That night I sat on my porch, watching the wind move through the trees along the back of my lot. The same trees that used to hide secrets now stood tall and clean. No tire tracks, no garbage, no drones. Peace isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It creeps in slowly like a sunrise behind thick clouds. One day you wake up and realize the air smells cleaner. The silence is easier. The shadows don't stretch as far. Sandra Wilcox thought she could bend the rules until they broke. Thought that a clipboard and a smile could hide corruption. But she didn't count on people pushing back. She didn't count on someone documenting everything. She didn't count on the community waking up. And now the only thing she'll be managing is her prison schedule. As for me, I built a new fence, taller this time, not because I'm hiding, just because I like knowing where my line is and I dare anyone to cross it.